and welcome to Carepartner Q&A Mondays at the Inspired Memory Care Education, Training, and Resource Center at the 80th Street Residence. Hi, I'm Nettie Harper, and I'm here with
Kelly Gilligan.
And I'm coming to you live from the Upper East Side of Manhattan, where our organization, Inspired Memory Care, collaborates with a vibrant community of individuals living with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias and their partners in care. We have both worked with individuals living with dementia in our personal and professional lives for over 20 years and have found our passion in the challenge, growth, and hope that can spring from the bonds we forge and maintain during the process of caring through cognitive change. It's been our experience that great care partners persevere through the struggles by having a team of like-minded individuals to be creative with and to lean on. We also know from experience that key education about cognitive change comes not only from research and experts, but from the people who are living with it.
So every week, we meet at the 80th Street Residence with our team of professional and family care partners and with the folks who live there for focus groups, committees, clubs, and research. They keep us grounded and let us know when we're on the right track and also when we're on the wrong track. It's our pleasure to present Carepartner Q&A Mondays as an initiative of the Education, Training, and Resource Center. Please, if you have a topic that you're interested in learning more about or discussing with us, enter it into the chat box or email us at info@inspiredmemorycare.com. Again, that's info@inspiredmemorycare.com. And it's important to us to bring you topics that you're interested in. Today's topic is communicating creatively with your loved one living with dementia. Let's get started. So there are many losses with dementia, but what we want to talk about today is how to come from a place of hope and how to retain hope throughout the process. We need to focus on strengths to do that, and a couple of strengths that tend to stay intact for individuals living with dementia are featured up on this slide. There are a few that we'd really like to take some time to highlight, and these tend to stay intact regardless of what form of dementia a person might have. So it could be dementia with Lewy bodies, or it could be dementia of the Alzheimer's type, but many of these skills and strengths tend to stay intact. The first one we want to really take a moment to highlight is procedural memory. Procedural learning is learning how to do a process, and it incorporates a muscle memory. So that's implicit unconscious memory. An example of procedural memory is how you learn how to drive a car. At first, you really have to be very deliberate in your driving and in sequencing the task, and then all of a sudden, it's automatic, and hopefully you don't do this, but you could drink a cup of coffee, listen to the radio, and put on your mascara all while driving because it's so automatic. Please don't do that. Not advocating that. But over time, you've learned, you've incorporated all of that movement and all of that memory right into your body. You're not even thinking about it. People living with dementia often have good memory for procedures, and when you incorporate that muscle memory aspect, they can remember things better. It just takes more repetition and more time, but they can still learn. So that can be very useful in care processes. It can be very useful in navigating their environments, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in future slides. Another strength that tends to stay intact is sharing opinions. Sharing opinions can set a foundation for good communication. And we're going to talk about why that is a little bit later on. One thing to notice, many people living with dementia do share their opinions freely. We might not always like the opinions that we hear, but the ability to share the opinion is a strength that we need to cherish and that we need to leverage. The ability to read is another big one, and this can be used in many different ways to support both engagement and independence. And we're gonna, on our next couple of slides, we're really gonna talk about how can reading be incorporated to support initiative and to support task completion for a person living with cognitive change. And then today's topic is communicating creatively. So we will be speaking about spirituality, music, and creativity. When a person goes through cognitive losses, there are areas that can still really thrive and that can be utilized for some enriching and meaningful experiences. And spirituality, music, and creativity are areas of the brain that we can really tap into and utilize meaningfully. Other strengths, just to highlight quickly, are the strength of movement. And sometimes people moving around and moving about freely makes us a little bit nervous, but again, that ability to move is a strength that we want to look at. Curiosity. Many of the folks that we partner with are lifelong learners, and there's a difference between having curiosity and enjoying learning in the moment and having the necessity to retain what you've learned. It's not necessary to retain everything that you've learned for the experience to be meaningful. And so I do just want to take a moment to say that, you don't have to learn everything. You don't have to remember everything that you learn, but the act of learning is meaningful in and of itself. And then emotional memory and the perception of emotions. And when we talk about the creative brain is really, really in tune and attuned to emotion. And so many individuals living with cognitive change have a heightened sense of emotion and a heightened sensitivity to emotion. We're going to talk about how to incorporate that into your everyday communication to create really beautiful moments. All right, so thank you again for joining us, and here are a couple of strengths to keep in mind as we move through our material today.
When we are exploring those strengths and finding ways to connect, remember that underneath everything, we all want the same. So if you as a care partner are stressed out, this may be a time to pause and breathe. Breathing slowly and evenly is a good way to stay calm. If you are calm, your loved one will mirror your physical reactions. This may actually create an opportunity to hold your loved one's hands and let them know simply that you love them and appreciate them. And it can be an amazing experience to simply pause and catch your breath. It is also amazing how often we forget to do this simple thing of breathing and just being present with your loved one. So throughout it all, when we're talking about communicating creatively, just don't forget to focus on feelings. We all want to feel loved, appreciated, cherished. We want joy in our life. We want to feel needed and have a purpose. And most of all, we want to feel accepted and have a sense of belonging.
So often with different forms of dementia, the frontal lobes might be affected early on to different degrees. So for instance, with a frontotemporal dementia, the frontal lobe will be will undergo more change than in a traditional Alzheimer's disease. That's why one of the golden rules that you'll hear in dementia care is never argue. While it is a cliche, it's true. When higher executive function has been affected, and also just because all of us are human beings as well, we're not always rational or accurate in our interpretations of and about situations and experiences. I know that's definitely true for me. You can ask anyone in my family. I am not always rational. And if you are, congratulations. Dementia can definitely complicate this, especially because a person might forget information. But in a situation, trying to argue or correct is not going to be the most effective way to communicate. We really need to, as Nettie mentioned, focus on the feelings. In this section, we're going to talk about ways to support a person who has frontal lobe change and ways to communicate more proactively and efficiently. And the reason we're going to do that is to minimize anger, resentment, and anxiety, and maximize connection. So what you see up on the screen is, and hopefully you're seeing the title. I know there's a little bit of a box there, but the title on the slide is Prepared Environments. The concept of prepared environment comes from Montessori. And so if you're familiar with Montessori, you know that it's a framework used to match the abilities of an individual to his or her environment, okay? So that they can have agency and ownership over the environment and a sense of kind of connection to the environment. There's a brilliant, brilliant individual, Dr. Cameron Camp, and he actually looked at Montessori modalities. He had some personal experience with them, and he looked at individuals living with cognitive change, and he thought, I think that the principles of Montessori would work to empower individuals living with dementia. And so he set out kind of researching the effects of setting up environments age appropriately, but using Montessori modalities for persons living with dementia. And his results were really pretty fantastic. If you want to learn more about his work, we're going to talk about some of it today, but obviously there are time limits. If you're interested in learning more, I recommend looking at the website, the Center for Applied Research. Nettie and I are going to type that right into the chat box so that you can follow the link, and you can see more about his work and about different courses that he offers as well. Today, there are 10 key principles of Montessori. Today, we're just going to talk about a few that really pertain to communication. The first, as I mentioned, is prepared environment. And a prepared environment really considers what are the strengths and interests of the individual that's living in this environment. And it might be the individual with dementia. And then it also looks at how do we compensate for areas of deficit so that there's clarity and initiative for the individual. And so some examples in this picture that's up on your screen right now. We can see that there are external, what we call visual cues that are designed to orient the individual living with dementia. And one of those things that's in the picture that you can see is a clock, right? It's not the best clock for a person living with dementia because it's a traditional analog. It's a little difficult to read, but they have chosen to include a clock in this one. Another thing that you're going to see in this photo, on that second shelf, there's a sign. Now, there's good signage and there's not so good signage. There are a few really great things about the sign in this environment. First, the font is sans serif. It's a very, very basic font that's really legible for a person. It also has on the slide an icon of a book. And so if you can see what it says, please enjoy reading a book. So it's just a naturally built-in invitation in the environment. What's not so great about it is good signage usually has high contrast. So we're looking at black on white usually for that real high contrast. And then also you really want to minimize glare and reflection. And you can see there's a bit of reflection coming off of this signage. And so it makes it a little bit more difficult to be able to read. Some other Montessori principles or other ways that they've set this environment up to be prepared environment, they've built in what's called a controlled choice. And Nettie's going to talk a little bit more about that in a future slide. But essentially, here you see there are 2 different choices of books. There aren't 5 or 6 different choices of books, because what you'll find is people can become overwhelmed when there are too many choices, and it can result in something called decision paralysis. So here we've got 2 books to choose from, and obviously you would want to tailor these books so that they're to the liking or appealing to the interest of the individual. So research of Montessori-inspired environments demonstrates that their use can really increase the initiative of individuals living with dementia, and it can increase that initiative when it comes to tasks that are involving self-care, care of other human beings, and also having a community role. And obviously, these are all really important factors in maintaining a quality of life.
Thank you, Kelly. That was very thorough. I wanted to share with the viewers, here's another example of a prepared environment, which Kelly was speaking about. Many care partners will come to Kelly and I and say that their loved one is resisting to change their clothes. Well, there's many reasons why somebody might be resisting to change their clothes. And so one of them may be that they're unable to figure out the sequencing of what to put on in a certain order. They may not understand that the clothes that they're wearing are dirty. They may be tired of you telling them to change their clothes. So now they've learned, well, I'm tired of this. I'm not going to do it. I'm tired of being told what to do. Because I don't know about you, Kelly, but I don't like being told what to do.
Nope.
Yeah, that comes off as commanding and demanding. However, if I happen to see some things laid out for me in a nice way, such as what's here, that's a nice little cue. It's a prepared environment. So the clothing is actually laid out in the order in which it's put on to support independence. This is actually a subtle way of communicating to an individual that it's time to change clothing. Also, the sequence of the clothing is done for a person to follow left to right and top to bottom. It's important to know the order your loved one might put clothing on and lay it out in that order so that he or she can do it independently. So again, a prepared environment can go a long way for individuals.
Absolutely.
Okay. So on this slide, we've actually featured another Montessori principle for supporting communication, the use of templates and visual aids to support procedural learning. And Kelly mentioned that procedural learning earlier is one of the strengths that remain intact pretty late into the disease process. Changes to the frontal lobe can cause a person to have difficulty concentrating, sometimes forgetting what they were up to in the middle of a process. So the use of these templates can provide a clear framework for task completion. They can also support a person to find information they may otherwise forget. There's nothing worse than that feeling that you've forgotten something. I think we've all experienced that throughout life. So having a system to write things down and an organized, decluttered environment can be very helpful in accomplishing things. It can also help a person to complete the steps of a task. When a person has difficulty with planning, having clear steps and instructions to follow can make a huge difference. So these types of systems that you see here can also help streamline things. Many times, individuals living with dementia may have post-it notes or other loose papers as reminders that become overwhelming or chaotic. So templating and incorporating a procedure can actually simplify and embed a process more deeply. And as you can see here, there's actually a very large wall calendar that can be used as a template. Also, when working with clients or your loved one to kind of, figure out what are their interests, we can see interests me, does not interest me. That's a very simple way of figuring out what your loved one or your client might be interested in. Kelly, anything you want to add here?
No, I think that was a pretty good explanation, and the only thing I would add, there I go, I say no and then I add something. The only thing I would add is that it's interesting to me how many people really enjoy sorting interests and talking about what's interesting to them now at this point in life. A lot of people get really excited about that process, and you wouldn't expect it necessarily, but I think it gives people some hope and something to look forward to.
Absolutely.
All right, so as we mentioned, another consequence of frontal lobe change can be distractibility. Too much information can cause a person to lose track of what he or she was doing, and they might miss steps or repeat them as a result. And the same thing goes with verbal instructions. Sometimes there's too much information coming at the person, and so a lot of it gets missed. Nettie shared some basic templates on the slide prior to this one. Another type of template can adapt a process by breaking it down step by step or task by task and cueing a person to check off each one as it's completed. You and I use that in our everyday life. It doesn't cease being useful when a person has cognitive change because, again, many people can read. So this is a nice way to orient. Templates or external cues can be designed by anyone. However, there are some careful considerations to make about the type, the format, the placement, and the content of the signage. An occupational or speech therapist can be a really valuable resource for determining things like the fields of vision, the hearing ability of the individual. As I mentioned, font and the font size to use, the person's reading comprehension. Do they best comprehend words or do they best comprehend images? What color might draw their eye, how they respond to different images, and so on and so forth. For some people, a tool like an Alexa or an Echo, like you see at the bottom of the screen, is actually better. So some people are not going to respond visually at all, but auditory cues can be really helpful. Other people hear an auditory cue and it ends up being confusing, or they don't hear very well. And so you really want to partner with someone who specializes in personalizing these types of strategies. When it comes to determining the content of what you put in the reminder, there are two people that really, really need to be involved in that process. And those two people are you and your loved one. Nettie mentioned earlier the feeling of being commanded to do something or demanded to do something. When you incorporate your loved one's voice into his or her reminder, it's your loved one telling your loved one what to do. I take direction from myself much better than I take direction from any other person. So if you can incorporate him or her into that process, that can be useful in terms of appealing to emotions, motivations, and using the right words.
I just want to comment on using the right words. It's interesting. As you know, Kelly, I take a medicine at 7 o'clock every night, and the A word, I'm not going to say it, is ALEXA.
Don't name that lady.
Yes. And I have heard it sound so often now. Every time she tells me, I get annoyed, and now I'm actually resisting. So when Kelly said using the right words, when you are using that A device, be very careful of the words that we are using, because it can also come off as demanding and commanding, and it might cue you to do the opposite, and it might cue resistance.
Yeah.
Because I hear it and I get so annoyed at Miss A in my apartment now. So just keep that in mind. Make it fun, use fun words, and go from there. Kelly, you were going to say something?
I was going to say some reminders, if it's a wake-up call or anything, you may even want to just look at using music for certain things, or songs that are reminders. Really, I think, as you said, to make it fun or create a mantra, use a ritual is important, because nobody wants to be bossed around by a robot. So
yeah. Absolutely.
And then another, something that you might, and again, the name of this particular module is communicating creatively. And so we're talking about ways to use opinion sharing and writing, and written word, and even verbal word. And so a special project that you might want to do or consider doing with a loved one is recording his or her legacy, creating a life storybook. And by life storybook, I mean a compilation of photos that are really meaningful to your loved one. And the way to do that is to ask his or her opinion on which ones are the most meaningful. And then kind of capturing his or her words about each of those photos. Another option for a legacy project would be StoryCorps. StoryCorps actually has a website, which we'll type into the chat box for you, and an application. And what the application does, it's a phone app, and you can record your loved one's voice and your voice kind of interviewing back and forth with very specific questions. Nettie and I are going to talk about the best types of questions to ask in a little bit, but to have your loved one's voice kind of sharing stories or sharing pieces of his or her life, that's really meaningful, and it's something that I think a lot of care partners would value having. It doesn't have to be through StoryCorps. It might also be creative writing through journaling together. I've had a couple of clients that have started blogs, some in early state, some with early onset Alzheimer's disease or dementia, and other people that are in their 90s and that have a form of dementia and are experimenting with blogging at this late age, which is pretty cool. Poetry writing is another really beautiful way to record a legacy, and some people it's just an easier form for them to communicate through because it has that cadence, or because it's a skill that they've had their entire lives. Poetry is not a skill that I have, but some people do. And then music is another really unique way to record a legacy. And musical legacies, that's something that I actually have some experience with. We did an album of my grandmother's greatest hits when she was in her 90s and going through some cognitive change. And the Nana's Greatest Hits CD is something that I know I really cherish, and many of my cousins cherish. It's her voice singing all of the songs that she sang to us when we were children, and that she sang to our children. And that's a beautiful piece of her that we'll have kind of forever. Although we should really probably put it on an MP3 at this point. I don't know if CD players will exist much longer. Nettie, do you want to talk about temporal lobes?
Sure. Well, emotional memory plays a strong role here, and language and memories that are tied to emotion tend to stay more intact. If you want to just jump to the next slide, Kelly. I think what we need to remember is that, when we are trying to make connections with our loved ones, we want to make sure that we minimize disruptions. And I don't know if you can hear the little baby in the background where Kelly's at. She just put herself on mute. But minimizing disruptions, although we always welcome that. I don't call it a disruption. She can join anytime.
I'm working from home today. It's more like an eruption.
But again, minimizing disruptions when trying to create connections is extremely important. We want to filter out that white noise, and it can be difficult. We want to eliminate background noise. And so when we are trying to talk to our loved ones, be aware, is the TV on? Is there music playing? Are there multiple speakers? Are 2 and 3 of you trying to talk at the same time, when in fact what we need to do is have one speaker? Because sometimes what happens is we start cross-talking, and then it becomes extremely difficult for your loved one to follow the conversation. The other thing, Kelly, what we've noticed when we're having group discussions with our clients actually is that we will actually ask a question or share an opinion and so forth, and then we'll pause. And we'll get into pausing in just a few slides, but there needs to be some pausing in between when we're sharing statements or asking questions, because again, it's taking them longer to process the information. And if we just keep going from statement to statement, question to question, we might be missing opportunities to make that connection. The other thing is, and we just shared it, we might want to consider environmental distractions. I know when Kelly and we were trying to do a training yesterday, I was actually working from home, and the trash truck was going by. So I had to keep putting myself on mute, and then Kelly had to pick up. So you just never know what those environmental distractions are going to be. So keep in mind, if we can minimize as many disruptions as possible, we can create better connections with our loved ones. The other thing that we may need to do is also, if we're kind of getting, no expression whatsoever, chances are a loved one didn't hear you the first time, so we just want to echo back. And when we echo back, don't rephrase it a different way. Echo it back exactly the same way to give them the opportunity to hear you again or hear the phrase again to better process.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. Sometimes people think it's best to change the wording. That repetition is so important. So on this slide, you see kind of an invitation to introduce yourself. And whenever I hear this from care partners, they'll say to me, I'm so afraid of the day that she doesn't remember who I am, or he doesn't remember who I am. Or, my mom doesn't know who I am. She constantly introduces me as her sister. And whenever I hear this, first of all, it breaks my heart, because there are so many complex cognitive processes going on to retrieve a name. And so I always think of the quote, "A rose is a rose by any other name." The emotion that you elicit is the same regardless of what your loved one is calling you. And so if my loved one were to call me the wrong name, but still light up when I enter the room, I know that he or she feels connected to me. If they were to refer to me as a mother instead of as a daughter, I know it might be a slip of the tongue. And Nettie mentioned that the frontal and temporal lobes are changed by cognitive change processes. So the temporal lobe stores our language. It stores our analytical language. And analytical language is looking at naming things. Analytical language is looking at categorizing a relationship. But it's not necessarily the emotional language that's stored there. In fact, the emotional language is stored on the right side of the brain. It's still in the temporal lobe, but it's affected much, much later than the analytical language center in most types of dementia. So this is, again, an opportunity to really focus on feelings. What is the feeling that you elicit in your loved one? And I also would caution you, you may elicit extreme anger from your loved one. I know I sometimes elicit extreme anger from my loved ones, but that's because they care very deeply about me. And so whether it's anger, whether it's love, whether it's joy, hopefully the majority of time it's joy, but please pay attention to whether or not there's an emotional response to you, because that can really be an indicator that there's a connection there. Also keep in mind, in some forms of cognitive change, some forms of dementia, they affect motor function, or they affect levels of fatigue a person might have. So from hour to hour, the brain might be functioning better. 1 hour, it might be harder to place exactly who you are, and an hour later, there the light goes on. Or perhaps I know just who you are, but I'm so exhausted and my motor function is not working well that I can't express it on my face. So please, please never assume that your loved one doesn't know you, doesn't recognize you. Focus on those feelings. The other thing is, Nettie mentioned earlier, forgetting something is one of the worst feelings a person can have when you know you've forgotten something, but you can't remember what it is. I always liken the name game to when you run into an old acquaintance from high school and they call you by name right away. They smile and they shake your hand pre-COVID and they say, "Oh, Kelly, it's so good to see you." And you're like, "Oh, it's so good to see you too." You know the person, but you can't remember how or who they are. And you usually know whether you like them or don't like them. But instead of connecting in the conversation, you're spending the entire time hoping that they don't notice that you haven't called them by name, and you're barely hearing anything they're saying. So to prevent your loved ones from going through that, if they are having difficulty with naming, I would highly suggest just saying, "Hi, Mom, it's Kelly. It's so good to see you today. I'm so glad to spend this time with you." And if she says, "Oh, I know you're Kelly," that's fine, but just give the opportunity to the individual you're with to make that connection and avoid quizzing him or her, because it can be highly embarrassing and highly emotional and shameful when a person does forget a name. Nettie, anything you want to add there?
No, I think we're good.
All right. And then when a person's biographical memory is affected by brain change, this kind of ties right in. Asking questions that rely on the biographical memory system won't restore the function. So sometimes people say, "Oh, I ask him these questions because I want him to remember, and it's gonna, I'm stimulating him cognitively." That's not quite the way that it works. Once there's damage to that area of the brain, repeatedly asking questions that challenge it it's not necessarily going to have positive outcomes. It can also, again, cause embarrassment, shutting down, or agitation. So while it can be tempting to ask, "Do you remember?" because you remember and you want to relive that positive emotion you shared with your loved one, it might not be the best type of question to ask. There are some alternatives to think about if you really want to share in a memory with your loved one. And if he or she acknowledges his or her memory loss, they may be okay with you providing reminders. So if that's the case, you may want to bring out a photo or view a video together and say, Mom, I just wanted to share this trip to Paris that we took together. Look at us in this photo. What do you think? What do you see? And kind of connect that way. Another way to do it would be through branching questions, which we're going to talk about in a little bit more depth in a second. But bringing out that visual cue and just kind of giving a prompt gives your loved one the opportunity to kind of build or add on to the story if they can. So if they have a memory they can share, the opportunity is there. The branching question is another tool. So the visual cue is one way, or the video, and then the branching question is another. When you look at the slide that's up on the screen right now, on the left you see traditional chit-chat questions. So how have you been? What did you do this morning? What did you have to eat this morning? These questions can be really challenging because they rely on biographical memory. So for what you're usually getting from your loved one is one, what we call a confabulation, where there's a made-up answer. I didn't have anything to eat this morning, they didn't feed me. That's very common when in fact the person has had something to eat. Or, oh, I had scrambled eggs, or you might get a platitude like, same thing I eat every morning, or I didn't do anything today, when in fact the person's done quite a bit. So that's a confabulation. It's kind of covering up the memory loss and answering not necessarily with a lie, but to the best of the person's ability with as much context information as possible. Or you might get, I don't remember, I don't know, and maybe a little bit of agitation. So those chit-chat questions can be a trigger for agitation. Other questions we mentioned, do you remember? Another one is, did you ever? And when people are trying to get to know one another, they tend to ask these questions. So where did you grow up? What did you do for a living? Sometimes when new professional care partners come in and they don't realize that the memory is not intact, they can really have a hard time after asking some of those questions. So that's another thing to look out for. Questions that tend to work and tend to prompt a person to share and even have fluidity in their speech. Questions on the right. So tell me more about Brooklyn. You mentioned it yesterday. There's no right or wrong answer to what the person adds, right? Would you ever visit, we were mentioning Paris, so would you ever visit Paris? Would you rather go to Europe or Asia? Would you rather eat a hamburger or a hot dog? And then we have that opportunity to add the visual cue. So these questions on the right are all branching questions, and they can be really useful with people living with dementia.
So just kind of going off of what Kelly said with the branching questions, there is a professor, Dr. Ann Basting. She's a scholar and artist whose work focuses on the potential for the arts and humanities. She has researched ways to infuse the arts into care settings with a particular focus on people with cognitive disabilities like dementia. She is actually an author of numerous articles and 4 books, one that came out this year. See, Kelly, we had something positive happen this year.
Oh, you funny?
The name of the book is actually called Creative Care, A Revolutionary Approach to Dementia and Elder Care. And I will take the time after I speak to type that into the comment box for you. She was the founder and president of Time Slips Creative Storytelling. And what she did, and we will also put in the link to her website. And so it's Dr. Ann Basting. And what she did is on her website, she has a bunch of different kind of fun, creative pictures. And you can see one of them here with the 2 dogs, the golden retrievers. And then she gives you prompt questions. And as Kelly mentioned, we don't want to have quiz questions. We want to have where there's no right or wrong. And so what you're doing here is you can create a story where there's no right, there's nothing that's set in facts. And so they can create their own story. And one of the things that Kelly and I do with our clients and our loved ones is that we'll have these pictures and we'll have the questions. And then if they're not able to write because of various reasons, then we will either record what they're saying or we will actually write it down for them. Then we compile them in a book, or on a recording on the computer, and then we start to send it to families and share so that they have this information for a lifetime, and then they can kind of share it back. And so it might be something like, hey, Kelly, what do you see in this picture?
Love at first sight.
Oh. And then what you want to do, just, I just want to share this with the viewers here, Kelly. What you would do when Kelly says love at first sight, I would say, wow, love at first sight. That's called an echo back. Then I'm actually going to pause because I want to see, does Kelly have more to share about the picture? I'm not going to jump right to the next question because love at first sight may start to bubble up some more feelings, some more thoughts about what's going on in the picture. Just from the first question, what do you see? So love at first sight, Kelly?
And dog breath.
And again, you may get some of those humorous answers. So I'm just kind of scripting down love at first sight, and then I'm going to write and echo back and dog breath. All right. And of course that's humorous. So we're going to laugh about it. Right. And then I echoed back. I'm going to pause again, see if anything comes of it. And then we kind of just go from there. Now you can bounce a question off of and dog's breath. And you might say something like, would you ever have a dog? Going back to the branching questions that Kelly mentioned before. Would you? Not have you ever, because have you ever is based in facts. Would you ever? Again, there's no right or wrong, but Kelly might say, well, Nettie, of course we've had dogs. Don't you remember? They might flip it right back on you. And then you might say, Kelly, I think you're right. Can you tell me more about that dog? You see how you can use those branching questions even in time slips. But again, allow them to share with you first. Echo it back, use the pause. And then after the pause, if they're not coming up with more to share with you, then what Dr. Ann Bastings has done is she gives you another question to do. What would you name them? And then we're going to pause. And each time while they're thinking, we actually, we had a training the other day with some individuals from a company, and it took them some time. They took this very seriously, remember, Kelly? And they wanted to come up with just the right names. And so we had to give them a full 30 seconds to come up with the names, because you never want to name the dog the wrong name, right?
That's a very serious thing to name a dog.
Absolutely. So again, make sure you're giving that pause, echo back. Don't just kind of drill down and fire off these questions, but really when you're echoing back, give them time to think it through fully, document it, record it, and share it with the rest of the family, because these really, they really spark some very fun stories, and it might be something you've never thought about doing, but you really create some true connections with this.
And then another opportunity that Dr. Basting presents is this concept of connecting through beautiful questions. I personally really enjoy framing beautiful questions as asking for somebody's experience or wisdom or advice, because in that way it infuses the conversation with some extra meaning. And so I know that I had a client that I worked with where we would ask advice questions from different relatives in his family, and he would actually type these beautiful responses out to them. However, they can also, using beautiful questions, can also just communicate a genuine desire to deeply know someone and that you're really tuned into them. And so some care partners have kept journals of these responses to beautiful questions. Others may not, but again, as Nettie and I have said, cataloging these types of conversations and experiences can be a really wonderful thing. Some of the beautiful questions on here, what do you think makes a home? So Nettie, what do you think makes a home?
I would say people who love me in the home and surround me with love. Yeah.
a beautiful sentiment.
Yeah. I'm feeling very beautiful right now, Kelly.
Beautiful question with a beautiful answer. Nettie, what do you think is the best gift someone can receive?
I would have to say the best gift is the feeling of being loved and understood.
Yeah, that feeling of being understood is really powerful.
Yeah.
And so that's an example of beautiful questions that you can ask. I love, what advice would you give to a new mother?
Don't ask me that one.
That's a question that could definitely prompt some humor. So I will not ask you that one right now, but I'll wait until we're at like a cocktail party and we need a laugh. Down at the bottom of the slide, you can see there's the resources and the creativity center. This is part of the Time Slips website. I know we are typing some of these links into the chat box, so please just make sure to check the chat box if there's a link you'd like to follow and learn more. All right, so this is a really beautiful example of how branching can be used to create a connection. It features a woman named Kathy Bari and her partner Rita Husted, and they're doing a Carepartner instructional video called Do You Know Me Now? And Do You Know Me Now was created by a pioneering neurologist who Nettie and I have a lot of respect for. His name is Dr. Daniel Potts, and he actually hosts a blog, which is another phenomenal caregiver resource, and it's called Alzheimer's Speaks. His focus is really on teaching care partners that they can continue to have mutually beneficial relationships by living the moment together. The link, again, we're going to type in the chat box for you for the Alzheimer's Speaks blog. And let's just take a minute to hear from Kathy and Rita. They have a wonderful partnership. They're doing kind of a fine arts project that was inspired by Kathy's mom. So here we go.
Are you sure? I'm 86.
Yes. How old did you think you were?
I didn't know whether I was going that way or this way.
What did you think you were doing?
I thought I was going in between.
Kathy Bori
Yes.
and Rita Husted are
Love.
friends. Rita is reading and recording words spoken by Kathy's mother, Joan.
Jumping out of the
When
sea.
Joan was afflicted with Alzheimer's disease, Kathy noticed that her mother's words had a new edge to them.
Do you think when we die, we'll see people we know?
I don't know. And I don't know anyone who would.
You know, I was expecting this slow descent into nothingness, and in fact, the opposite happened, and it took me by complete surprise. You know, I was just trying to think about the first time it happened, and I remember we were in this cafeteria in a mall, and it was a very depressing place. It was full of wheelchairs and walkers, and we used to go in all the time. And I was feeling quite down about everything, really. And I wanted to ask her advice about something, and I wasn't sure if she still had the capacity to answer my questions in the way that she'd done so well before. But I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose, I might as well ask. So I said to her, Mom, what do you do if you love somebody but he doesn't love you? And without skipping a beat, she says, go find someone else. And it was so funny, but it was also very good advice. So I just kept going, and I wrote it down on a napkin. I still have the white coffee stain napkin in my files. And I think it was that moment where I thought, there's more going on here than I thought and that I was expecting, and that I'm doing her a disservice by having limiting expectations. And after that, I started to record our conversations, and she just continued to amaze me.
To honor her mother, Kathy recorded her words
think of
and
this-
published them
this
in a memory
moment?
collection. Thanks to Rita Houston, she now has them on audio tape as well.
This place, it's just too crazy for me today.
It wasn't crazy until you got here.
So you can see, so you can see a little bit of the humor that comes out between care partners here, and also just the richness of the relationship that can come from asking these types of branching questions. So I hope that gave you a good sense or a good feel for branching questions.
Okay. So Kelly, you spoke a bit about branching questions, and something else that's really important when connecting with your loved one is making sure that there's opportunity for choice. As care partners, we bring so much love to our loved ones, and we want to protect them. We want to do right by them. And sometimes what ends up happening is we do everything for them. And when we do this, we start taking their choices away little by little by little. And then what ends up happening is we have this thing called learned helplessness. And when that develops, we stop being able to make choices. So we hope that today, this little technique, we can start bringing back some choices back into your loved ones' lives. This is what we call a controlled choice. And I do hope our viewers have had some food already today, because this controlled choice always makes me hungry, Kelly. So here's the controlled choice. Would you rather have a croissant or a donut?
Are you asking me?
I think I'm afraid to ask you because we have not had dessert yet today. But
You know the answer to this question for me.
Kelly,
Yeah.
would you prefer to have a croissant or a donut?
The answer is always both.
And I do appreciate that answer from you, Kelly, because I think it kind of shares a little bit with our viewers that if you do give a controlled choice and they say both, that's okay. Because why not give them both? We can cut it in half and we can give them both. That is still a choice. But again, we can do anything when it comes to programming, when it comes to personal care. We want to incorporate as many choices in their day as possible to give back their independence. And some people might say, well, I can't make choices for everything because they'll make the wrong choice. Now, clearly, we have a croissant and a donut. If we're working with somebody who's diabetic, probably not the best choices. So we want to create choices where we're guiding them to the best choice for them, all right? So if we are worried about somebody who is a diabetic, we might want to have a smoothie, or I don't know, what other choice might we want, Kelly?
A crudité, vegetable crudité.
Of course you would come up with vegetables. I'm thinking of a smoothie and yogurt, fat-free, like.
I'll never make the mistake of offering you vegetables when you're older, Nettie, don't worry. I'll hide them in things.
So we may have a smoothie or we may have some vegetables, okay? So you're gonna kind of guide in where you want the best choice to be, but we're still offering that choice. Also, would you like to have a walk outside, or would you like to do your physical therapy exercises? So we're getting exercise with both of them, but when we use the word physical therapy, we have a lot of clients, unfortunately, who'll be like, I'm not doing any exercises, but I will walk outside. All right. Would you prefer to take your shower now or after breakfast? We're still going to have a shower, but we're going to have a choice of when we're going to have it. Would you prefer a bath or a shower? Would you prefer to have your shower in the morning or at night? So we need to kind of incorporate. And then the other thing, just kind of throwing these choices back with shower. I know a care partner will probably say to us, well, they'll pick in the morning because that gets them out of doing it tonight. Well, what we want to do is come to some type of agreement as well and use those templates, as we showed you earlier, the wall calendar. And we want to start building systems so it would become part of our procedural memory. We start writing these agreements on a calendar. We also have some of our clients that will sign off that I agree to this. This will work for me. Because they agree to it, they become part of the process, and they're more likely to do it because they were part of the process. So again, try these types of techniques, not only to make a connection, but also it creates more independence and it minimizes that resistance on things. Anything else you want to add here, Kelly?
No, I think you really kind of covered that. You're guiding, but you're giving the framework, but you're not deciding. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that.
Okay,
all right.
Great. All right. Okay. Our next one, and we hit this a little bit, Kelly, but let's go a little bit more in depth, and maybe we can even do a little bit of an exercise too. So many of your loved ones may have some difficulty with word finding. And so when we were talking about the time slips and the beautiful questions, we talked about pausing and echoing back. So it can take a person living with dementia up to about 30 seconds to fully process and respond to an instruction or question. Now that's Kelly and I's experience with our clients. There is some research out there that says that it can take around 90 seconds to fully process. Now again, with our experience with our clients, we've been giving them approximately 20 to 30 seconds, and typically we do get a response. However, individuals with a deeper cognitive reserve of vocabulary may take longer to access and select the right word in response to your question. So just be aware that we want to at least give 20 to 30 seconds, and you may have those few individuals that have a deeper cognitive reserve, so you may have to allow even more time to process. Because if we don't allow the time for processing and we interrupt, we create frustration. And that's normal, guys. We all hate being interrupted. Kelly, do I hate being interrupted?
Oh, yeah.
It's so frustrating. It takes me a little longer to get my point across. And when I get interrupted, it just ruins my whole flow, okay? So we have to be careful and we have to be mindful. Allow that time to process. So in order to do that, we thought we would share a little bit of an activity with you. I am going to ask a controlled choice question, and I'm going to time out 30 seconds. And listeners that we have, you're going to actually sit and listen to us, do nothing for 30 seconds so you can hear how long, or hear nothing, how long the pause is. So let me get my stopwatch. All right. The controlled choice question is, would you prefer to take a nap now or take a walk outside? And that is 30 seconds. And we will actually ask, care partners, does that seem like a long time? And I will say, Kelly, when you and I first started off over 20 years ago, it was a long time. And so what was happening back when we started, we didn't know that we needed to wait that long, right? It's only from many experts that have taught us in the field that they do need that time to fully process what we're asking, or or the instruction that we're giving. They need that time to fully process. And oftentimes we'll see it, if they're in therapy and the physical therapist is inviting them to stand up and they're not standing up. However, 30 seconds, 45 seconds later, all of a sudden now they're taking the initiation to stand up. It's because they needed to fully process what was being asked of them. So it's not that they're resisting to stand up. They just needed the time to process what was being asked of them. Okay, so again, 3 different techniques here. We are looking for a pause, an echo, and when we are pausing, we're looking at around 30 seconds for that time to process. Okay, Kelly?
Sorry about that. I had a trigger finger. All right. So we're going to move into a third Montessori principle that can be useful for communication, and that is demonstration. when we mentioned the temporal lobe a little bit earlier, and there can also be challenges with auditory processing where my ear is actually kind of relaying the messages of what I'm hearing accurately. So introducing demonstration to the process so that the person can follow what you're showing them how to do can be a really empowering thing. There's a mantra in Montessori that goes, talk less, demonstrate more. And so an example of that is, rather than saying, come on, let's go, very simple, I might smile and just gesture, come with me. And you want to be careful when you're gesturing. Some people don't have a great awareness of, like, I think about the traffic police that we saw when we were commuting this week, Nettie. Some of them were not gesturing clearly. It couldn't be my driving. It has to be their gesture. But some of their gesturing was really about as clear as mud. So when you're thinking about your gestures, really think, you know, how big should the motion be? Where am I located so my loved one can see me? Sometimes something as simple as dining gestures can make a really huge impact. Nettie and I have certainly seen where when people may forget how to use their knives and forks, and just sitting directly across from your loved one and demonstrating the act of eating for them can be a social cue to them of what to do and what utensil to use. So really look at, where can demonstration be used? Where can visual cueing be used? I know in other modules we've talked about using the senses to cue a person that it's time to shower. Sometimes the visual of the bath towel or the washcloth is what helps the person in showing them it's time to get clean. Okay, so props and demonstration can be really useful. Nettie, do you want to talk about the special project here?
Sure, sure. Another way that we can support you guys as care partners in connecting with your loved ones, if we are having some difficulty with, you know, verbal, or, you know, they're asking where you are or other family members, or maybe there's also even some repetitive questioning, Kelly, what we can do is invite family members, or maybe you have these photo albums. I know as I was growing up as a kid, my mom was always really good and she always had the photo albums. We still have the photo albums, but they all just sit on a shelf, right? And so nobody's really looking for the photo albums. This is the time to pull out the photo albums. Flip through the photo albums. If your loved one responds to a picture in a very positive way, make a photocopy of that photo. Then what you want to do is just on that one picture per page, write a sentence. And you can see here, it says daughter Sarah, 8-month-old Beatrice, and son-in-law Frank. Very simple. Identify who they are. If it's an event that they attended and they responded positively to that one, you would write one simple line of what the event is and who's in the picture. Because what we don't want to do is what Kelly mentioned earlier. We want to avoid quizzing, such as who am I? Who are these people? That's what we want to avoid doing, because then people shut down. We want this memory book to be positive memories. So we want to label it for them. And then it's a way that you can connect. Often are kind of like the time slips and the beautiful questions. Let them come out with the memories that they have. Now, Kelly, I think it's also important that we mention, if they come out with a memory that's not completely accurate, let's not correct them. It goes back to what you said earlier. They might be confabulating, which means that they're filling the holes with memories that aren't quite accurate, but they can't remember the accuracy of it. But they're just kind of filling a hole here and there. But it's okay, because you know what you're doing? You're creating a whole new story. You're hearing their voice, and they feel comfortable enough to share their voice. And that's what we want. We want their voice to continue to be shared. The last thing we want is to overcorrect them, because once again, Kelly, what do I love about overcorrection?
Nothing.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing, right? So we need to be careful when we're overcorrecting. It doesn't hurt to create new stories together, okay? But start this memory book and start sharing and start talking and connecting in a new way.
I also just want to build on that. You can use labeling as well. It doesn't always have to be a book. So if there are a bunch of photos around the home and they're on walls or they're maybe on the bookshelf and your loved one is looking at those photos, it might be helpful just to put a small label at the bottom. Also, we've had folks where their loved ones are putting things away in the wrong places, or they're becoming confused thinking that items are missing. And putting labels on the cabinet, on the outside of the cabinet, either in picture form or word form, depending on what's most intact for your loved one, has made a really big impact for them in terms of their independence in the environment. So just another kind of thought along with the labeling of the photos for the book. You can also label concrete places, things, and areas in the home. Okay. When cognitive change starts to affect the parietal lobe, movement can become really challenging, and also making sense of sensory information and putting the world into a 3 or even 4-dimensional model to interpret how everything fits together. That can become really difficult. And so you see up here on the screen, your awareness of your body in space, your spatial orientation to other things, and then planning and executing movement can also all become very difficult. And you may have seen your loved one go to put a glass down and not be totally sure that it's on the surface they were reaching for, or you may see them kind of go to sit and miss the chair. So one of the methods that we'd like to highlight is using a person's hands to guide them. This is a method for communicating kind of kinesthetically or through movement. And our bodies associate motions with specific activities. So I'll give you an example. I once was working with a woman who had cognitive change. She was pretty advanced in the process. She also was completely hearing impaired. She had no hearing, and she had very, very minimal vision due to macular degeneration. She was legally blind. And so doing the dining process with her and trying to support her to eat her food was really challenging, because you can imagine not being able to see, not being able to hear, having cognitive change, and then all you're feeling is something hitting you in the lips. And so that was tough. We learned really quickly how to use the hands to guide for her. And so the act of raising a glass to our lips, it does a couple of different things. Number one, it gets our mouths ready to receive food. And number two, it cues us that we're eating or drinking, okay? And so having that technique in use and using someone's hands and using motion is just another way of communicating without words. It's almost like using your demonstration. Another technique that we're going to focus on in a future module is really looking at stimulating individual senses at a time. Sometimes people talk about overstimulation of individuals living with dementia, and Nettie really touched on that when she was talking about minimizing disruption. But when we try to stimulate multiple senses at the same time, it can become confusing for someone who has change in the parietal lobe, because they can't isolate one thing to focus on. A person might see colors and shapes and shadows and light visually. Those are all different strengths they may have. A person might be able to smell fragrance. Some people do lose their sense of smell. Others, that's a really, really solid way of stimulating memory. A person might feel touch or texture, or even just the presence of another individual in the room with them. Even if it's different than the way you or I would, they can experience those senses. A person might enjoy and experience motion or emotion. They may be able to enjoy or not enjoy flavors and temperatures. And oftentimes that opinion sharing comes out when it comes to that. So we're going to talk about these things in greater detail at the end of today's presentation, and what is their role in communication and in communicative processes. Okay. And then another thing that can be really useful, another technique that can be really useful for someone with change in the parietal lobe is the use of counting and rhythm. And the reason for that is we all are kind of born with a natural sense of rhythm, right? I'm doing my heartbeat right now. And using a natural sense of rhythm and motion can help a person integrate and anticipate movement. And there's a lot of research to that effect, especially incorporating music therapy and musical modalities into movement. If you think about dance, I'm sure you've seen many videos out on the internet of people kind of dancing when maybe they're having trouble with just regular walking and gait integration. So rhythm is a useful tool. Also counting. Many individuals, when you hear 1, 2, 3, you know we go on 3, right? That's something you learned as a kid when you're playing your games. So, so counting to 3 or asking your loved one to count to 3 before doing a movement can help them to anticipate. Also, with receiving touch, sometimes people can become very startled, and they may even lash out when they receive a touch they're not anticipating. And so I've been able to support people through the care process by doing, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do a wipe on the count of 3, or it's going to touch your arm on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. And that again helps them to kind of accept and feel a sense of control. All right, anything you want to add there, Nettie, or no?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. And then I have up here sensory bridging. Sensory bridging is a little bit of an older technique, and it ties into Montessori in that Montessori talks about using what's called a manipulative, so something in the hands. And what Cameron Camp finds with the use of manipulatives are they often focus or anchor the person to a task. And so their attention is a little bit stronger, a little more focused with the manipulative. Sensory bridging is kind of a way of using manipulatives, but we're looking at integrating the sense into what the task is. So if I'm assisting somebody with a shower that maybe doesn't have the range of motion to move the washcloth over his or her skin, I might hand him or her a washcloth to hold on to so that they have the texture of the terry cloth in their hand, or so that they have the bar of soap in the hand to experience what that feels like. And that can anchor them to what the task is. Another example of sensory bridging is handing a person a spoon or a handled utensil while you're supporting them with dining, if they truly can't be actively involved in the dining process. Holding an instrument while participating in a musical experience. Even just grasping, a small instrument in the hand while hearing the rhythm can be a way to kind of integrate. So that's the concept of sensory bridging.
I just want to say one thing there, Kelly. When we speak to a lot of care partners and we say, can you tell us the typical day? And a lot of people will say, well, they're in front of the TV. And we hear a lot, like people will doze. Well, when you're in front of a TV, you don't have anything in your hands. So you're not acutely in presence or holding or engaged. And so it's no wonder why people are dozing consistently when you're sitting in front of the TV for hours. So what happens is care partners will say they can't be engaged. Well, we have to go back is what manipulative can we engage them with? Because TV, it's not going to do it all the time. It could be that maybe there's a musical program, but like you said, give them a musical instrument while they're watching the musical program. But sometimes just the musical program is not going to do it. So we have to put them both together.
So we mentioned earlier that you never know when that neuron's going to fire. And so if there is that opportunity for spontaneity or for improvisation, it could happen just based on the sensory bridging and having the manipulative that Nettie's talking about. So you never kind of want to miss that opportunity. So I mentioned in the section about the parietal lobes that stimulation of individual senses can be helpful to communication. When a person can no longer read or write or recognize objects through pictures, we sometimes have to get very, very creative. And we're going to talk more about this and the role that nonverbal communication can play in this section. What you see up on the screen is that the occipital lobes are responsible for reading and writing, locating objects in the environment, recognizing objects, and recognizing object movement and speed. So when this lobe becomes damaged due to cognitive change, it can really be tricky. So a couple of tips are on this slide, and Nettie's going to go over these tips and their importance as they relate to this.
Sure, sure. And I think the first one is extremely important, with everything that's going on in the world right now. Care partners, I'm sure that you're overwhelmed. Some of you may be homeschooling right now because of the remote classrooms. You may also be caring for a loved one and also holding down a job. And so one of the first tips is move slowly. With everything I just said is on your plate, how on earth can you move slowly? So right there, I feel like we're asking you to do something of the impossible. However, if we are moving a bit more slowly, like when I said, when we're asking a question or asking an opinion or giving an instruction, we're asking you to give them 30 seconds to process. That's what we need. We need to move a little bit more slowly and give your loved one time to process. And also, as Kelly mentioned, when there are some of those visual deficits or hearing deficits, if we're moving too fast and our loved one is living with those deficits, we can actually scare them a little bit more. And then what happens is it's that fight or flight response. And then we get told they're aggressive, right? When in fact, unfortunately, we moved a bit too fast. We scared them, and that's why they reacted that way. So we need to be careful of what's our approach. Can we slow down? Because if we slow down, we may not have that negative reaction from them. The other thing is that at times we may have our peripheral vision may be narrowing. And when that happens, we need someone to approach us from the front because we can no longer see out here. So if we're coming from the side and all of a sudden you're doing things or touching me, I haven't seen you, so I don't know who's touching me. So now my initial reaction is to strike because I have to protect myself, okay? So approach from the front. The other thing is being attentive to tone, and there's a couple of tones. My voice can be awful and piercing. So I have to bring down my tone when I'm having interactions with my loved ones and my clients. The other thing are condescending tones. So sometimes they may interpret you as being condescending. Also, we mentioned demanding and commanding. So be careful. Sometimes with our culture, we might shorten sentences like, come on, let's go, let's go. However, depending on somebody's mood, they might be in pain, they might be tired, that can come off as pretty negative. And so I'm going to react to the tone. So we have to be very careful and attentive to our tone. Kelly mentioned the touch already. Some people like to be touched, some people don't. Also, some people are sensitive to touch, meaning your hands might be cold, right? So I typically have very cold hands. And if I go to touch somebody, they initially have a bit of a shock and they might react. So we need to be mindful of that as well. Also, it's important to look people in the eye, but keep in mind we have to be sensitive to people's culture as well. So sometimes it can be disrespectful to look at elders in the eye. So be aware, but we're speaking about your loved ones. So again, you should know whether it's respectful or disrespectful to look at people in the eye. But certainly in the culture of the United States, typically it is, we look at people in the eye. And the other thing why it's important for people living with dementia, speak a lot through the eyes. You can read their mood through their eyes. You can pick up, you can read if they're angry or in pain through their eyes. So definitely you want to take a look at their eyes. The other thing is you want to match people's facial expressions. You know, if they're feeling a bit more somber or sad, you don't want to come in like, "Hi, Kelly, how are you?" Because then what happens? You've really set them off. I want you away from me. This is not good. I don't need this. I will say I was in the car with Kelly today before she started working from home, and she had on the Pandora station. It's called the Happy Station, I think is what you called it, Kelly.
It is. It's the happy station. It's curated songs with a positive message and a happy message.
Yeah, but she was very kind. She said, "Is this too much for you this morning?" And you have to do that because we need to meet people where they're at in their mood as well. And so if you do have a loved one that's having a tough morning, you need to meet them there to try to draw them out of it. But drawing them out of it does not mean to come in all bubbly and excited, because then that can turn them deeper into that not so great mood. We've got to gradually pull people out of it, and gradually might be that we're playing some music that they might enjoy, and then we kind of bring the music to help draw them out of that mood. So again, these are just some simple approaches that we need to be aware of that can actually turn somebody, if we do it the wrong way, negatively, or we can turn somebody to a positive approach if we do it appropriately. Okay?
Absolutely. And then communicating through the senses. We've touched on this, no pun intended, throughout the module today, but one of the most common, we're going to use one example to kind of drive home different strategies for communicating through the senses. One of the most common concerns that we get from care partners is that their loved one is having a resistance to bathing, that they're choosing not to bathe for long periods of time. So I'd like to use that as an example of communicating through the senses and what it can do. When a person can't tie the word shower to what that means, because there's change in the brain, or when they can't tie shower to why it's necessary and what the positive outcome is because there's change in the frontal lobe, that can pose a really major challenge. So how do we communicate to an individual that this can be a pleasant and safe experience for him or her? The answer is there's not one right answer. Everybody has different levels of brain change. Everybody has different strengths. Everybody has different traumas. Some people have fallen in the bathroom, and so it's extremely fear and anxiety inducing for them to go back in there and try to maneuver. But triggering the senses in the right way helps for many, many individuals, regardless of what the background or the lead up was. So how do we use the senses to create a pleasant experience and create kind of a positive association and sense of control? It might be using the fragrance of a familiar soap and a very soft washcloth. I know with my child right now, she uses the same fragrance of wash every day at bath time. And what she's grown to associate is that when I pull that bottle out and she smells it, she knows it's bath time. She's pre-language. She's not using words yet, and she's not walking yet. So her cognitive development is at a specific stage, but that olfactory sense, ding, 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 she knows exactly what we're doing. The same can be said for individuals. I mean, I smell Irish Spring Sport, and that brings me to the shower. Some people hate the fragrance of Irish Spring. They think it's too much. So for me, it's pleasant. For others, it might not be. So you really got to look at what's going to build the memory and look at using it continuously as part of a procedural learning process. So keep consistency. That can really make an impact. Music or a favorite food. And Nettie, I know you've actually given people bowls of ice cream while they are being bathed, participating in the bathing process.
100%.
Yeah, and so we want to, again, develop a positive association with this experience. The other thing is stimulating senses that are not involving the skin and the tactile sense can help take some of the attention off of what's happening with the body. For some individuals, there's pain or there's discomfort associated with touch. They may be interpreting kind of their senses a little bit differently, or that sensory experience a little bit differently. Even the cold might feel overwhelming to them. The spray from the nozzle might feel overwhelming. And so incorporating other senses in a positive way can help distract from the negative things that are going on. So that's another example of kind of how to use flavor or how to use the auditory sense. If there is extreme sensitivity to temperature, I would highly recommend looking at the environment and looking at using the sense of temperature in a positive way. So how do we adapt with a heat lamp or with a towel warmer? I know for a couple of my clients and for both of my grandparents, the way to get them to take a shower in the winter was to actually have a towel warmer and steam the bathroom so that they didn't feel that acute sense of cold. And I have to tell you, I personally, after implementing that for them, implemented it for myself, because there's just nothing like that mad dash you do in and out of the shower on a really cold winter morning. And I don't think that that's necessarily age or dementia specific. It's just not pleasant. It's freezing. Okay. Nettie?
Right. Yes. Well, thank you for joining us today for Caregiver Q&A Mondays. We certainly hope that you will be able to walk away with some tips that help you better connect and enhance your connections with your loved one. Once again, we are grateful for the 80th Street residents for allowing us to have the Inspired Memory Care Education and Resource Center right there at the 80th Street residence. And if you would like to learn more information about the 80th Street residents, we certainly have the link here, and we will tape it into the comment box, and you can go right there to their website and learn more information and hopefully take a virtual tour with them as well. If you would like more information, please visit our website at the link here, and I will take that into the comment box. And on there, you will see that we do have some on-demand webinars that you can certainly join us for. We also do have a subscription activity program that you can learn more about, and we can come to you live right in your home and work with your loved one and through activities. We also have a certification program for professionals. So if you are working with professionals with your loved one and you would like them to become more informed with dementia care and connecting with your loved one, please feel free to sign them up for our certification program. We look forward to you joining us next week, same time, same place, Facebook Live. It's going to be at 3 p.m. If you're not able to join us at 3 p.m., just know it is recorded, and we do upload it on our YouTube channel. You can find us on our YouTube channel at Inspired Memory Care. And our topic next week is musical notes that connect today and yesterday, the gift of music therapy. And we will have a special guest. Her name is Rafael Segmato, and she runs and owns a company called Nostalgic Notes. So until then, stay inspired. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.